Teaching reading is a very complex process. I think that your initial step when teaching reading should always be to consider the purposes for which your students will read in the future. So, are you preparing your students for general reading for entertainment? Are you preparing them for reading for information like reading a newspaper? Or are you preparing them for an academic context, as is the case in many intensive English programs, where we prepare students for a period of maybe 1 to 3 years to prepare students for success reading academic texts, so mainly articles, books, and so on. So once we consider the purposes for which our students will be reading, then all of that information is going to influence how we teach reading and what skills we prioritize. So reading instruction varies according to different levels. I think at its simplest is when you are teaching beginning level students. With beginning level students, you're really teaching for general comprehension of details and the way that those details or individual sentences combine to make a whole or a paragraph. And then as you progress more into intermediate level teaching of reading, you're going to focus more on how you can parse main ideas from details. In my experience, I found that it's often difficult for ESL or EFL students to understand the concept of the main idea of a passage. So that's a critical thinking skill that asks students to look beyond sentence level comprehension and toward the purpose or the topic or the theme of an entire paragraph or article that they may be reading. At the advanced level, teaching reading becomes more and more complicated. You're teaching them to skim text, and you're teaching them to scan text. You're also teaching them how to use the text to make inferences about the text or about the author. And you can also include information about discourse structures of a text. Is this a problem solution text, a cause and effect text, and so on. What kind of text should you use? Well, the kinds of texts, as I mentioned, should align to some extent with the student's future needs. However, at the beginning levels, I think you are drawing more from students' interests in a particular, you're drawing more from students' interests. So at the basic level, you want to find texts that are engaging for students, texts or topics that they find interesting. But then as you advance further and further, you can get more specific in the type of text that you choose. So if you are teaching advanced level students, you're going to choose texts that approach the realia or the authentic text that they will study in a university setting. In the intermediate level, that's where you're going to choose texts that are both engaging to students as far as their topics and texts that are more academically oriented. So you want to blend those. I've found that newspaper articles are a form of text that targets intermediate level students. So it's very important for students to have a purpose when they read. These purposes can range from general comprehension to reading for specific information. They can read for entertainment, and they can read for completion of questions like general comprehension questions that you might see on a test. Reading, in other words, for fun or for the sake of reading. But I think it's the teacher's job to make these purposes more specific. And usually these specific reasons come during classroom assignments or on homework assignments when teachers ask students to read to find out more information about the author's position on this topic. That would be an advanced level example. You could also ask students to read for the amount of statistics that they find within a article. You can ask students to read for the sake of idea of reinforcing a particular skill, such as reading for the main idea or reading for a one-sentence summary of a text. If I could give teachers one piece of advice for teaching reading, I would tell teachers to emphasize pre-reading activities. So pre-reading activities are activities where you are stimulating interest and building background knowledge about a text. So even if a text is challenging for students or potentially dry or on the more boring side for students, I think that you can address these issues when you are pre-teaching or when you are doing a pre-reading activity for a text. During pre-reading activities, I often bring in media such as images on a PowerPoint, or I bring in a video to help build background information about a text and to get students interested. Because I think once you've created that inertia during these pre-reading activities, then the reading of the text becomes both more enjoyable and more productive for the students. So in conclusion, I think that we sometimes make the mistake of thinking of reading as a very general and abstract concept. You know, I'm teaching this reading class, I'm going to teach students how to read, but we don't put enough thought into the complexity of the sub-skills involved in teaching reading. The sub-skills like grammar skills, vocabulary, knowledge, fluency, reading for a particular purpose. And when we start to think about all of these sub-skills, we realize that reading is a lot more complicated than simply asking students to read a text. Yes, students need practice just simply doing the activity, reading, but we also as teachers need to pinpoint specific skills to help students with that larger task of reading.